Well, thank you for joining us today on the state of education. I hope our conversation will be insightful to you as we work to reclaim education and culture where you are. Now, we've all heard a lot about education in Loudoun County, Virginia. It's been in the news for a year or more. Our guest today is Monica Gill. She is a history teacher in Loudoun County in the public schools who, with two others, have sued the school district over the school board policy 8040. Because her case is active, she is joined today by her attorney, Logan Spina. Well, Monica and Logan, welcome to the State of Education. We're glad to have you today.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thanks, Melvin.
You're welcome. And we're grateful that you've joined us. And we're excited to hear your story, Monica, and the victories and challenges that you've faced as a teacher in Loudoun County. But first, why don't you start out by sharing a little bit about yourself personally and just kind of lead into what led you to become a teacher in the first place?
Sure. Well, I have been teaching for 27 years, all high school. I have always wanted to be a teacher. I mean, even from, I remember being a little kid and playing school, and I used to play teacher and make my brothers be the students, and I actually would make them do work and grade it. And I think that's why they didn't like school as much as I did. But I always loved my teachers and I knew that I wanted to be a teacher, and I knew I wanted to be a history teacher by the time I got to 8th grade. I had a history teacher who just was phenomenal, and she really had a huge impact on me. And from that point forward, I was just on the road to being a teacher and knowing how much it was important, not just to teach kids the content of history and government, but also to have them know that somebody loves them. And that, I think, is the thing that the Lord has put on my heart the most, particularly when I launched into my teaching career. He really spoke to me and just said, Monica, the most important thing for these kids to know is that someone loves them unconditionally. So I am a teacher who I try to make my classroom look very much like home. I make coffee for them every day so that it kind of smells like home. I have a little sign over my door that says, "You are loved." I tell my students that I love them every day when they come in, when they leave. I write it on all of their tests and quizzes. They get a bonus question. It says, "Mrs. Gill loves you, A, true, or B, false." And, they know they should put true. And I think they think it's funny at the beginning of the year, but by the end of the year, I think they realize that I really do love them unconditionally. So that's where I am.
Awesome. So as a student yourself, were you in a public school, a private school, homeschool? Tell us a little bit about that.
So I went to public school all the way through. I felt like I got a pretty decent public school education. Went to the University of Maryland for undergrad and George Mason University for my master's degree, and have taught public school all the way through, and absolutely have had a wonderful career. In fact, when I started teaching for Loudoun County Public Schools 20 years ago, I couldn't wait. I couldn't wait to be a teacher for Loudoun County Public Schools. It had the best reputation for the best education. But in the last, I would say, 10 years, I have really watched that kind of crumble and been very dismayed by that crumbling. And finally, a few years ago, I was like, I can't be quiet about this anymore. We have to step up and stop the rot.
We are going to go there. And you've kind of shared a little bit, certainly, about some of your philosophy of education, but, about the importance of kids feeling loved and cared for and all of that. But just in a nutshell for our listeners, what would you say, how would you sum up your personal philosophy of education as a teacher?
And personal philosophy of education as a teacher, I would say, is just that, it's important for kids to have content and foundational knowledge, but more importantly, our job is not just to teach these kids the dates and the facts. History and government is also a story, and that's what makes it compelling. So knowing that story and getting them invested in that story and that they're a part of that story is also important. But also, education is every bit as much about teaching these kids the basics of self-discipline and responsibility and good work ethic. And I've really seen an erosion in all of these areas. So seeing that is what has kind of raised my ire.
All right. Well, I hear you. So let's go ahead and jump in a little bit. So you're in a lawsuit right now. Tell us about the school board policy 8040 that you're in a lawsuit against. What is it about that? And what demands does it make on you and others in the school system that you're not okay with?
Well, let me have Logan talk a little bit in the specifics about it, and then I'll reflect on how it's impacted me.
Okay.
Sure. So you probably heard Monica talk about a whole range of different educational issues. And she, of course, is free to speak about that as a teacher and as a member of this community. The lawsuit itself addresses a more narrow issue than some of the various educational issues that Monica's kind of alluded to. So policy 8040 in particular says that every person, a student or members of the staff at the school, has to refer to students that are either transgender or identify as gender expansive with whatever names and pronouns that student identifies or specifies. So that requires then people like Monica to express a message that they believe is false. That, for example, a student who's male in sex actually is a girl. The message is essentially a person's identity is the only thing that makes a person a boy or a girl. So because Monica and two other teachers object to being compelled to speak that government-approved message, they filed a lawsuit under the Virginia Constitution, which, like the U.S. Constitution, protects their right to free speech and free exercise of religion.
So personally, as I've watched this policy come to fruition, I first heard about it from Tanner Cross, who is one of my co-plaintiffs. One of my co-plaintiffs. He was saying, they are looking at passing this pretty radical gender policy. And at that time, he and I knew each other because we were already speaking at school board meetings about any number of issues that were going on in education, including that. And he said, look, they're gonna pass this. So I was keeping my eye on it. And finally he said, I'm going to speak at the next school board meeting against this because I think it's wrong. And it looks like they are going to pass it. And he sure enough did. And really all he said was, I'm not going to lie to kids. This is wrong. And simply for making that statement, he was 2 days later put on leave. And as soon as I saw that, and Kim as well, who's the other co-plaintiff, we said we're Christians too. We cannot let him stand alone and take all of these slings and arrows. We need to stand for our values as well. So we joined with him in the lawsuit, and it affects all of us. I'm a high school teacher. Tanner's an elementary school teacher. Kim is a middle school teacher. We all have dealt with kids who have gender dysphoria or claim to be transgender. In my 20 years in Loudoun County, I've had a handful, maybe 10 years ago, more these days. But I have always had a good relationship with those kids who are LGBTQ. I have always been respectful and loving towards them, just like any other student, and again, had great relationships with them. But I have never affirmed that a boy was a girl or that a girl was a boy. I just can't do that. And if I am forced by this policy to call a student by a pronoun that is not in alignment with their biological sex, I'm essentially conveying to that student that gender is binary, and that is just not true. Words have meaning, and it also has a consequence. And so I can't lie to these kids. I have to show them and be truthful with them. The best thing that we can do to show love and respect for others is to treat them with enough dignity to speak to them in words that are true, accurate, and in conversance with reality. And the reality is that every one of us has a word stamped inside us. It's either XX or XY in the abbreviated version. But if you take that abbreviation and you unravel it, we get the DNA code, which is 3 billion letters long. And so I would say, how could we as human beings look at that word, the longest word known to humanity, and say, there's no meaning behind that word. There's no author behind that word. I get to define for myself what that word means. When we live like that, we're living a lie. We're living in rebellion against who we were designed to be. And so many of these kids who I have who claim to be transgender, they will say things like, well, I'm just trying to be my true and authentic self. And my question for them is always, is that what's really happening? Are you really trying to be your true and authentic self? Or are you in rebellion against your true and authentic self, against who you were designed to be? So for all of those reasons, because it's harmful to kids, because it is harmful, that I have to speak words that are government mandated and have my pronouns micromanaged by a government agency, this is all wrong. This is not what our kids need. This is not what our institutions need. It's certainly not what teachers need.
Absolutely. It's interesting. We have heard for years, follow the science, and then all of a sudden, the irony is science doesn't matter anymore.
Mm-hmm.
There are no absolutes, and I can decide for myself. And that doesn't, however, equate with reality on so many different levels. And I think you stated it well in your own perspective that nobody should be compelled by government or really by anybody else to speak something that you foundationally believe to be untrue and ultimately not helpful to your student. We did a panel about a week ago as we were ending up the month of June. The title of it was Pride, Pronouns, and Problems. And we had a great panel that really discussed the whole, especially the transgender issue from many perspectives. And for our listeners on this, if you missed that, you can go back on our site and you can find that. And I think you'll find that quite insightful from the different perspectives of our panelists. But back to our topic here right now and our conversation. It's interesting to me. Many school systems seem to be more focused on policies related to social and political agenda than they are on ensuring that our students are well educated. I mean, we have massive problems like low reading scores and student discipline problems and on and on. I mean, we talk to teachers all the time, and I've been in education since 1982. Okay, but what's going on today is just phenomenal, and our whole society is starting to see that there are many things that are broken, and so a lot of times we talk a lot about what's broken, and we need to in order to understand what's going on. But in reality, we also have to be really focused on solutions. So talk to us just a little bit about your own experience as a classroom teacher with what's going on in the school, in your classrooms, not only yourself, but your colleagues, and let's just speak broadly for out of your own perspective, but for so many teachers and the challenges that are being faced by teachers today.
Sure. Well, you are right. It is a really rough time right now in education because so much of education is about ideology right now. And that's what the Loudoun County School Board, where I teach, has been focused on. They've been far more focused on things that are ideological than educational. And we are seeing the harm that is doing to our kids, whether it's critical race theory or radical gender policies. they are really having their impact because we're not focusing now on the things that are really important. And that's kids being able to do the basics of reading and writing and arithmetic. And I'm seeing that, as I said, I've been teaching for 27 years, 20 of them in Loudoun. When I first started teaching in Loudoun County, teaching AP courses and academic level courses, my students were fairly well equipped to be in my class. But this past year, I really was shocked at how far things have, just eroded. I was teaching a course this year that I hadn't taught in about 10 years. And this is an academic level course, which means it's supposed to be for the average kid who may or may not go to college. Mm-hmm. And as I was looking back at the materials that I used 10 years ago, I was shocked at realizing that my students in my class this past year could not do that work. They would have been incapable of it. It wasn't that the work was outdated or not any good. It was that they would not be able to do it. And the reality is that of my students, none of them who are in 11th grade, none of them were on grade level for reading. None of them. Most of them were about 8th grade in the 11th grade, but about a third of my students were on a 4th grade reading level or below.
Wow.
And that is just tragic. And that, I think, is really a testimony to this mentality that we've had that, well, we don't want to hurt a kid's feelings. It's all about their self-esteem, and failure is not an option. So we just keep passing the kids on, even though they don't actually show mastery in the things that they need in order to be well equipped to do well in society and in jobs. But I've watched this erosion just happen slowly. Many of my colleagues, we comment it all the time. It started maybe about 10 years ago when we were told, well, you can't take points off if a kid doesn't put their name on their paper because that's grading behavior, and we can't grade behavior. We can only grade content. And so it used to be that I'd take 1 point off if a kid didn't put their name on their paper. And that for most kids only happened once. But now I'm not allowed to do this simple practice of teaching kids, as I said before, responsibility, right? And good work ethic and discipline. And so since I can't do it, I have this corkboard in the back of my room now that's just covered with no-name papers that kids have to go and claim. And and so there are other issues too, like we were told we couldn't grade homework anymore because, well, there are some, it wouldn't be equitable because some kids don't have anybody at home to help them. So now we don't assign homework anymore because something that's not graded isn't going to get done. And then our county also went to this, we have formative grades and summative grades. So a formative grade is something like classwork or homework, but it can't be graded towards their final grade in the class. They can only be graded on what's called summative grades, and that is a test or a quiz or a project. And so the first question my students always ask is this formative or summative? Because they're doing the calculus, right? If it's not going to count towards my grade, I'm not going to do it. Yeah. And that's detrimental because then they're not doing the building blocks needed to be able to get to that test and quiz and pass it. So all of this erosion for a focus on ideological and social, issues is really, we're seeing having just a corrosive effect, not only on our kids' education, but we've spent all this time on these social things thinking this is the answer to, building better kids. And the truth is that our kids are not doing well, right? We have the highest anxiety levels and suicide ideation rates and depression and so we have to really take a step back and say, has all of this that we've been doing the last 15 years, has it really been helping our kids? I don't think we could honestly look at that and say, yeah, it's been more beneficial.
Yeah. It's interesting. For generations, it has been clearly understood that children do better when they have clear parameters and clear expectations. They struggle when they don't have those. And so whether it's parenting or whether it's, in school, when you lay out what the parameters, what they can do, what they can't do, what they have to do, where they have option of their choice and engagement. When all of that is clearly laid out at age appropriate levels, students thrive because it's a safe zone. It's something they understand and they can flourish in that. But when there are no parameters and everybody's just coasting along without expectations and without parameters, that creates a lot of anxiety and a lot of insecurity in kids, because by nature, kids learn by watching others and by following role models and so what we've ended up with, unfortunately, is a system that has torn down all the walls and all of the bridges, and it's like, okay, their life is out there ahead of you. Make what you can out of it. And what they need is coaching and help and mentoring and shepherding and guidance and, may I say, parenting. And, those things are what make strong, healthy kids. So I'm throwing that in for free.
You'll get no argument from me. You're preaching to the choir there.
So here's a question for you, Monica. How do you think education can be improved? And specifically, how can parents help their kids and teachers navigate these issues that are being grappled with right now?
Well, I think the most important thing is, as a parent, you have got to be involved. You have got to be paying attention to what is going on in your students' classrooms with your students' teachers. If they're in high school, I know that that's probably 7 classes that you have to, and 7 teachers that you have to look out for, but you've got to do it. In this day and age, we cannot afford to be sleepy about it and just, trust that everything that's going on is okay, because I guarantee you a lot of the time it's probably not. So, being, vigilant in talking to your kids about what they're learning, and then being sure that you are also taking the time to, unpack all of what they're learning with them, and doing it in such a way that it girds your foundations for your kid and your beliefs and your values. But then also, you can't just stop there. You've got to volunteer at your kid's school. You've got to go to the school board meetings. You have to pay attention to the policies that the school board is passing. You've got to pay attention to curriculum, volunteer to review curriculum, and approve it. Be a part of that process, because I think, the education system has spent a long time living just in this bubble of, well, parents aren't paying attention. We don't have to be transparent. And so that's how they've gotten away with really pushing ideology and taking this ideological turn. So that's an important part of it too. I would say also, if you decide that you aren't going to have your kid go to public school, that you are going to homeschool your kid, or you're going to send your kid to private school, that can be a good thing in terms of wherever there's competition. We know where there's competition, that makes public schools better. So that is a good thing. But if you take your kid out of public school, that does not absolve you of the responsibility of being part of that process. And and even if your kids are up and out, I'll tell you, I had a conversation with a friend of mine who I hadn't seen in a while, ran into him, and he said, I just want to thank you for the things that you've been doing, but I have to be honest with you, I feel like I'm responsible for what's happening right now, because I took the attitude of, well, my kids are grown and they're out, and now I'm just going to hand it over to the next set of parents, and it's your turn. And he said to me, I will never not vote in another school board election or local election. I have been dismissive about this, and this is not the way to go. We are where we are because so many of us have just said, okay, our kids aren't in it anymore, so we don't need to pay attention. So whether your kids are up and out already, or you are involved in private school or homeschooling, the state is in control of public education. And you are a citizen that has to have a say in that, and that needs to have a say in that. And you need to go and vote your values and press for your values to be a part of the conversation, because you know they are. So if they are, we need to be doing that too.
Monica, thank you for saying that. That is an area that is so often overlooked. We kind of expect parents of school age kids, it's your responsibility. You are the first educators, and it's your responsibility to stay on top of what's going on in your schools and with your kids and so forth. But, I'm a grandparent. All right. How many grandparents do we have out there that the system is completely, impacting their grandkids? How about just regular citizens who are taxpayers? Look, everybody who's paying into this system, if they're a property owner, they're paying into this system whether they like to or not, and they have a voice, and they should express that voice, because by not being there at the table and by not expressing what their concerns are, we are actually helping with the decline of our overall educational system. And because we are citizens, we have the right, and may say the responsibility, to stay engaged, because it is, in reality, it is our schools, I'm going to add our churches, but our churches and our schools that shape really the culture and everything that we have as a country. And so it's so critical that all of us are engaged in strategic ways. Let me ask you this question. So I'm sure it can be exhausting to stay engaged and effective as a teacher. It always has been, okay, and probably more so these days. So what is your advice to other teachers who are navigating the same or very similar issues and find themselves discouraged? Look, let's be honest. We hear a lot about Loudoun County on the news, okay? But look, just next door, Fairfax County. They've spent the last how long, the school boards, debating what their pronoun policy is going to be. And it's not just those counties, it's all over the United States, where school boards and the system, some are doing better than others, but it's a systemic influence, it's a systemic problem, and teachers all across the country are struggling with these issues. And one of the things they're struggling with is, okay, if you and a couple others stood up and said, we're going to fight back, how many others are there that feel just like you, but they don't have the courage or the security to stand up and fight back? They're afraid for their jobs. They're afraid against the personal attacks. And these are very real things that happen to people. I've talked to many of them. And, they don't agree with what's going on. They want to see changes. They want to see better practices. And so here, my question for you is, what advice would you give to teachers out there that really, they want to see change, they want to be at their best, but they're afraid?
Yeah, it's you're exactly right. Where I teach, I have a lot of quiet support, right? Because they will say things like, well, I respect what you're doing, and you're so courageous, and but I can't do it because I can't afford to lose my job. And my quip back is, I haven't lost my job yet, and I'm doing it, so why can't you?
Yeah.
It's important that there be more voices, because the more voices that they're aware of, then the more change could actually be able to take place.
Right.
If you're silent, that means that just gives them the right to continue down this path and run roughshod, and that's not okay. So, if you're going to stand up to bullies, you got to stand up, and you have to say something. You have to be willing to pay the cost too. And I think for myself, ultimately, I think about, in the end, in the eternal perspective, is it going to matter more whether I stood up for what was right and what was true, or kept a job that had benefits? And that's just not, there's just no contest in that. And I think when you frame it like that for people, and they really start to think about it deeply, they will be willing to take those risks. And as they see other people taking the risks and being successful, then courage begets courage. So they're willing to step up. But I would say to teachers, don't fold over. You need to speak up at school board meetings. You need to speak up at your faculty meetings. You need to be a part of speaking against what's going on here, because if we don't, then it just continues to collapse. And I get it that it's discouraging. I have moments of being discouraged myself where, I just am like, I don't even know if I can do this anymore or want to. It's so disheartening. It's so heartbreaking to see the decay that these kids are in emotionally, spiritually, academically. And I'll tell you, I had one such moment a couple of years ago. It was the beginning of the new school year. I was moving into a new classroom, cleaning this classroom out, and I was in such a low place. And I was praying, talking to God, and just saying, Lord, I don't think I can do this anymore. I don't want to do this anymore. It hurts too much. And as I was praying and cleaning off this bookshelf, I noticed an old book kind of stuffed in the corner, and I picked it up and I dusted it off. And the cover said Holy Bible. And I thought, my goodness, what are you doing here? So I opened it up, and the inside cover, it said, presented by the class of 1955. And I was like, wow, this Bible had been a gift to my school from the senior class of 1955. And of course, my cynical side started to kick in and say, oh, look at how far we've fallen. You would never see anything like this today. But I have to tell you, Melvin, the Lord got a hold of my heart and said, Monica, I did not give you this gift for you to judge this place. I gave you this gift so that you would know I have not abandoned this place, and I have placed you here for such a time as this. So be my salt and be my light. And so to those Christian teachers who are out there, I would say, don't give up. Don't be discouraged. The Lord has not abandoned me. He has not abandoned our school children. He has not abandoned our public schools. We have been trying to push him out of the public sphere for decades, but he is still here, and he is waiting for teachers like us and our Christian students and their parents to stand up and say, no, this is the truth. This is the way. This is the way to walk. Let's go.
And in addition to both the moral courage of people like Monica and obviously the spiritual support from the Lord, there's obviously a great legal tradition that protects public employees, including teachers. So if you're listening to this and you have a potential problem with your speech being restricted, or you're facing punishment as a result of standing on your convictions, you should contact us at adflegal.org.
Yeah.
And they're wonderful.
Yeah, excellent. And you guys have done some tremendous work and continue to. Go ahead, Monica.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I would say too, to any teachers who, again, are concerned, not only is ADF here, but look at the parents around you who are rising up against this fight, because I found that it became even easier to stand up when I knew I had the support and cover of parents, right? So not only did the Lord just remove all my fear, but then, when I was like, protect me, it was like, oh my goodness, I was just surrounded by protection from parents who were like-minded and hated what they were seeing going on. And then he sent ADF, which, talk about being in a moment where you feel like, I am not getting anywhere. I cannot fight this fight by myself. It's futile. And then to have an organization like ADF come alongside you and say, here we are with all of the resources, all the knowledge, all the expertise, everything you possibly need to take this to the next level and to be successful. it's a blessing from the Lord for sure.
Yeah. And I would just add to parents and educators out there, um, we are in a time of significant change. You look at what's been going on in the last few years in education. Yes, we've been sliding and slipping down a wrong track, many of us feel. Yet at the same time, those people who stand up and say this is not okay, uh, the results that they are getting in the courts through state legislatures and on, are pretty incredible. And I believe we will continue to see that. We're seeing a lot of change happening at local school boards. And, all of those things happen when citizens stand up for what they believe is right, what they believe is true, and they simply say, we're not okay. We're blessed still in this country to have a republic type form of government where we elect our representatives, and those representatives speak for us. And if they don't, we can get somebody else who will speak for us. And so I think it's important for everybody to take heart, to understand that, we are not too far gone. Some systems may be pretty far gone. But I tell you what, when we have competition always tends to improve the quality and drive down the cost. And so that happens in every other industry, and it happens in education. And so I just encourage parents and educators, step up, step out, don't be afraid, don't be vitriolic, don't be angry, be intentional, educate yourself, learn what the issues are, speak kindly, but be intentional and be diligent. To those teachers out there who are afraid you're going to lose your job, yeah, you might. I hate to say that. You might. But you know what? Other people in the news recently lost their jobs, and the courts gave them back. Okay, and the same thing can happen for you. Here's something else that you should consider. Every quality teacher out there is in high demand. Okay, because it's hard to find really good teachers. It's hard to find really good employees of any kind. Okay, but the reality is, people who do their job with excellence and who stand on principle and conviction, there will always be a place for you. It may not be where you are now, but it may be through some private school or some charter school or through some homeschool co-op or whatever. There is going to be a place for you. And so this is no time for us to back away. This is time for us to step forward, to lean in, and to see the changes that we want for our children and grandchildren. And Monica, just real quick, kind of as we're wrapping up here, and first of all, there may be something else specific you want to say, and you take that time. But I'd like to hear, what is one of the most rewarding moments you've had as a teacher in your career?
Wow. There have been so many really great, wonderful moments, but I will tell you, this year I had a pretty incredible moment with a student. The beginning of the school year, I got an email from the student who said she was going to be in my class. She was not happy about having to be in my class. She had seen me on the news and in the papers, and she didn't like my stance on things. She felt like I was ignorant, and that my views were ignorant, and that the world was a toxic place, and essentially not pleased about being in my class. And I sent her back an email very kindly saying, thank you for telling me how you feel about this. I just want you to know I've been teaching for a very long time. I've been, teaching all kinds of kids from all kinds of different backgrounds. And I know a lot about what diversity really means. And I just want you to know that I have only 2 goals for you this year. One is to love and respect you. And the second is to hopefully teach you some history in a fun way. And I hope that you would just take whatever preconceived notions you have about me and set them aside for now. And so I made the point of sitting her right up front next to my desk and just spending as much effort as I could to engage in a relationship with her and to just show her that I loved her, just like any other student. And this year for Teacher Appreciation Week, I only got 1 card, and it was from her. And she said, "Mrs. Gill, you really are a great teacher. Thank you for being a great teacher, and I hope that I have you again next year."
Wow.
So coming from someone who was so displeased and disgusted at the thought of having to have me for a teacher, at the end of the year saying, not just that you're a good teacher, but I hope I get to have you as a teacher again, that was worth, I didn't need any other card for Teacher Appreciation Week this year. That was it.
Yeah.
That was the money.
There you go. That's an awesome story. That's an awesome story. And Monica, thank you for stepping forward and for working so hard for our children, for our communities, our families, and our country. And I know as a person of faith, you do it for God as well. Thank you for that. And I'll also just say to Logan and to your organization, the organization you're with, thank you for all the great work you guys do as well. And together, we're going to keep working hard because our children deserve it. And we just absolutely have to bring the very best possible for them, for their future. And so, any final word?
I don't think so. Thanks so much. It's been a real pleasure, Melvin.
It has been. Thank you so much for giving us the opportunity to be here.
You're welcome. And thank you for joining us.